Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through yet another season together. As always, you can find our 100% free, 24/7 boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars when you follow us on social media each day on Facebook and Twitter at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. We just wrapped up day 2 in the facility during week 1 on Wednesday. It was an interesting day, to say the least. It's always an interesting day in the life of the NFL, but Jaguars are continuing to gear up for week 1 against the Carolina Panthers this Sunday. I can truly say that it's definitely, and this is just, from 2 limited times there, in the open locker room over the last 2 days. Definitely feels like a different locker room than it felt like for most/all of last year. Like, even before things really started spiraling last year, you could feel the locker room was just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, I guess I'd say is the best way to describe it. They had their leaders, absolutely. And it's not as if they didn't work hard, but it just seemed like they knew pretty early on that things just weren't going to go well. And that's just my perspective of the locker room last year. To me, the main difference, and again, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm reading too much into things. But this is my perspective from being in there, from talking with guys, is one, I think overhauling the roster as much as they did has made a difference. You have a healthy mix of guys who weren't there last year. It's about half the roster and most of the practice squad. Guys who did not experience that turmoil last season, that complete debacle of a season and then the debacle of the 2023 season. So it's not a sense of, like last year, I'd say the locker room, it was definitely a sense of guys who were coming off that extremely disappointing 2023 season. And you could tell that they were putting everything they could into, okay, let's not repeat last year. We have to fix last year. We can't let last year happen again, etc. I don't really get that vibe from this year's locker room. And I think it's because there are so many new guys. I mean, you have 2 captains who have spoken this week in the locker room, and Robert Hainsey and Jordan Lewis, who weren't here for last year. I spoke to Austin Johnson for a few minutes today in the locker room. He wasn't here last year. You have a healthy mix of rookies who weren't here last year. So obviously you still have some veterans who want to put last year behind them. Foye Oluokun spoke to it some on Monday about how, he's just determined to kind of show that last year was a blip on the radar, and he's determined to have a better year this year because really nobody had a good year last year other than Brian Thomas Jr. and Trayvon Walker. So I think it's a locker room that it's not carrying the burden of and the anxiety of we can't let last year happen again. And I think that's a positive thing. Maybe the Jaguars should have overhauled more of their roster in 2024. Because I truly believe that makes a difference. And the other part of it is, I feel like it's a locker room that, at least from what my vibe I'm getting from guys is they believe in what they're doing. They believe in what the staff is doing and what, they're being taught, what they're hearing, what they're preparing for. I can confidently say that I did not feel that was the case often last year. And it was early on last year. I mean, just for one specific example, and I won't name names, but there was one player in the locker room last year who very early in the season, and he wasn't outright saying, okay, like stuff like the coaches don't know what they're talking about or anything like that. But you could tell as it pertained to the defensive philosophy and especially the heavy rotation of guys, you could tell he was kind of side-eyeing it. You could tell there was not a complete buy-in from the locker room, in my opinion, on either side of the ball because they didn't have that belief. And I've gotten a different vibe from it this year. And again, I've only been in there twice. They haven't lost a game yet, because that's normally when a locker room really gets its mettle tested, is when you lose some games, face some adversity, etc. But speaking to guys, like hearing Travis Etienne talk about his place in the offense, how he feels like he can go back to his old self and make plays because of how many spots they're putting him in, how many different things they're asking him to do. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, I thought at the podium, looked like a guy who wasn't anxious about week one, who wasn't unsure about week one. Instead, seemed like a guy who was very, comfortable, confident. And again, maybe I'm reading into things, but that is just my feeling early on from, now being around these guys a little bit as they prepare for the Panthers. And again, if something wrong happens on Sunday and the Panthers game doesn't go how they hope, and if something wrong happens next week against, the Cincinnati Bengals, something wrong happens next week against the Houston Texans, say they're 0-3, maybe that changes. But I have definitely gotten a different vibe and takeaway from the locker room through the first 2 days that we've been allowed in it this year. And to me, that's the value, in my opinion, in me being boots on the ground the way I am. I can't tell you these things from watching press conferences and just opining. You have to be there. You have to feel it. You have to talk to guys. And that's truly the takeaway I have. As for some other, business, there was no Travis Hunter on the injury report for the Jaguars on Wednesday. That was expected. James Gladstone said last week he was a full go. It was very clear that the upper body injury wasn't serious, and that was precautionary. Like, he missed those 2 preseason games and that joint practice in Miami. I think, and the vibe I got from talking to people inside the building was that if those were regular season games, he would have played. He would have toughed it out. There's just no reason to, push him in that scenario. There's no reason to put him at any risk of re-injuring himself. Now, would they have loved for him not to miss any time and to have gotten valuable reps and in practice and in game? Absolutely. But it never seemed like his injury was all that serious. And he didn't show up on the injury report at all on Wednesday. A major win for the Jaguars. All in all, they're fairly healthy. They do have those 2 rookies on IR. Caleb Bransaw, who I saw in the locker room with a boot on his, I want to call it left foot. And Jalen McLeod, the strong side linebacker, who will be designated to return. So you will see him again at some point in the season. Those are 2 guys on IR. Then they have 2 guys who did not practice. Buster Brown, who, has been working off to the side, trying to get into, back into the swing of things. And he's really, really working. And I get the sense that they are highly anticipating his return. That they think that this is a system that he can really thrive in. Guys, he had a great spring. He's a really good zone corner. So I get the sense that they're really eager to get him back. No Wyatt Milam. He did not participate in practice. We haven't seen him working off to the side, so he's probably a couple weeks away. Cole Van Lannon was limited. He's an interesting one because just looking at how they might set up their actives and inactives on game day. So it's safe to assume Buster Brown and Wyatt Milam won't be active on game day this week. So that brings you down to 51. I think it's probably safe to assume that BJ Green and Danny Strigow won't be active. That brings you to 49. Who's the last guy? If Cole Van Lannon is inactive, didn't have, 7 offensive linemen to dress, with only Chuma Edoga and Jonah Monheim as the backups, it's an interesting situation to watch. I'm interested to see how Cole Van Lanen, if he is ready for week 1 or not. That is all we have for today's episode. Please give us a review, like, subscription, follow, whatever on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the podcast platforms. And as always, I'll be back next time.